Peace, and welcome to another episode of the Quranic Remedies, where we spend about 15 minutes exploring a page from the Quran together and seeing how we can apply the verses to our lives. And hopefully, with God's permission, it helps us heal our brain, body, mind, and soul. So today we'll be reading from chapter 8, the spoils, from verses 41 to 45. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge to God from the accursed devil. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the gracious, the merciful. وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا غَنَمْتُم مِّن شَيْءٍ فَأَنَّ لِلَّهِ خُمْسُهُ وَلِلرَّسُولِ وَلِذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ إِن كُنتُمْ آمَنتُم بِاللَّهِ وَمَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَى عَبْدِنَا يَوْمَ الْفُرْقَانِ يَوْمَ الْتَقَى الْجَمْعَانِ وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Know that if you gain any spoils, a fifth of it is for God, the messenger, the near relatives, the orphans, the needy, and the wayfarer, if you truly believe in God and what we have sent down to our servant the day of the criterion, the day the two groups met, and God is capable of all things. إذ أنتم بالعدوة الدنيا وهم بالعدوة القصوى والركب أسفل منكم ولو تواعدتم لأخلفتم في الميعاد ولكن ليقضي الله أمرا كان مفعولا ليهلك من هلك عن بينة ويحيي من حي عن بينة وإن الله لسميع عليم. When you were on the near bank of the valley, and they were on the far bank, and the caravan was below you, if you had set an appointment, you would have had failed in its promise. But it's for God to accomplish a matter already ordained, to demolish who He demolishes upon a clear proof, and those who are to live will be able to live upon a clear proof. God indeed is hearing and knowing. إذ يريكهم الله في منامك قليلا ولو أراكهم كثيرا لفشلتم ولتنازعتم في الأمر ولكن الله سلم إنه عليم بذات الصدور. When God showed you to them to be little in a dream, and if He showed you them to be a lot, you would have failed and argued in the matter. However, God has made peace. He knows what is in the chest. وإذ يريكمهم إذا التقيتم في أعينكم قليلا ويقللكم في أعينهم ليقضي الله أمرا كان مفعولا وإلى الله ترجع الأمور. When He made you perceive them, when you met as few in your eyes, and He made you appear as few in their eyes, so that God will accomplish a matter that will happen. To God all matters are returned. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا لقيتم فئة فثبتوا واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون. All you who have believed, if you see a unit, then stand firm and remember God a lot, so that you may be successful. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. God the Great said the truth. Now, the verses here, they start in regards to what happens if someone conquers and they get spoils of war, things that are left behind after the other side is defeated. God is sitting here something where He's giving us clear instruction with a clear percentage on how much that needs to be given. They go to God and His messenger, to the wayfarer, to the orphans, the people who are needy, and the near relatives. This is supposed to be a fifth of what God has granted you on that day. Now, obviously, the Quran is an example to all things. This is something that for us to understand that God is going to be presenting us certain ideas that for us to use our reason and see if we are capable of applying it in different ways. Obviously, the majority of us in this day and age, we're not really gaining any spoils of war. So someone can say that, well, this argument here or this verse is only specific to the war times. But rather one can understand that God, He's here telling us that He is expecting a fifth of what we're doing or what we are gaining to be given back to a group which is clearly shown as the people who are accepting of zakat or accepting of sadaqah, charity, or the purifications. So one can say that the upper limit is 20% when you want to give. There are other verses that are telling you that you shouldn't be overspending, you should be also taken care of, you shouldn't underspend, and there's other ways of you applying on what needs to be given on the time that you need to give it. But we see here generally God is telling us that 20% is good for you. This, of course, in regards to things that you have been given, this is a very clear-cut direction, which if you don't do it, then you're sinning, because this is a clear commandment from God. But when it comes down to the matters where you have earned it or God has produced it from the ground for yourself, then this is where you need to start to apply this general understanding and this morality that God has given you. Obviously, we always should be aiming for 20% because the more that you give is better for you. But you're not sinning if you do not give 20% outside of the scope of a war bounty. And this is where this Quran is extremely helpful for somebody to understand what God is expressing to him in a way that is meaningful, and for you to start using your reasoning and intellect and based on the situations that are in front of you. But God is telling us that this is a commandment from Him if we truly believed in what God is revealing to His servant in regards to war bounty, that you have to be giving 20%. But there is a very specific word that has been used in this phrase, in this verse here, which God is calling it the day of the criterion. The day when God is making a very clear distinction between the disbelievers and the believers. Now, there is something that we have to keep in mind. The disbelievers do not believe that God is assisting the believers. So God can produce an event where it's very clear interaction or intervention from God, where the other side, when they get humbled and embarrassed and humiliated, they either have two choices, whether to believe that God is actually supporting the other side, which to them was considered the weaker side, or are they really going to fall deeper into their disbelief and to even push further away from God and to fight the believers even more? Now, God is telling us in regards to how He is assisting the believers, even in the most hardest thing when somebody is striving for God. God is saying that fighting and war and these types of circumstances is the hardest thing for a believer in this earth. And rather, some people would consider death is easier than actually going to war and to fight. But here we see an example where God has placed the believers against the disbelievers, where there's a valley in between. A caravan was going through the valley, and it's very clear that this is when the believers were going to be given what God has promised them at the earlier of this chapter, that God is going to let them overcome the disbelievers and that they were going to be getting spoils. And they didn't want to go to war, but now they could see the war right at their footsteps. Obviously, the believers are not called or told to transgress, but rather here they're taking retribution for all the wealth and the people that they've lost along the way for just being believers. They were kicked out of their homes, they had to move away, they had to leave their wealth behind, and some had to leave their kids behind, and they've lost people along the way, and now they're going for their retribution because God allowed them to do so. But there is this thing that we're represented, where we know this about human psychology, where when we see a big group against a little group, the little group is always considered as the underdog, just simply because of the numbers. But God is here showing us how He helps the people stay solid in their faith, and He gives them a way for them to increase in the will and their will to survive and the strength that they're showing. You could see on the other side as well, they start to act arrogantly just because they had the numbers. They start to look down on the other side and feel like they're going to win no matter what. It's just because of the circumstances. So they start to act arrogant and they see the other side and they underestimate them. But you can't really underestimate a people who say that they believe in God and they're striving for God. Because however estimates and however predictions that you're going to have, you're not going to be able to overcome God. And you're always the one who's estimated to be the very little and very small in the eyes of God. And God will always be the victor. So here God is saying that He's going to make it in a way so that it's going to be clear that the people who were destroyed, they were destroyed because of the intervention of God, and the ones who were surviving and lived, it was because of what God has decided. And this is where God is saying that this is a matter already ordained. He is going to use these believers as a sign for all of humanity, that when God is on your side, it doesn't matter who's against you, you're going to win. But at the very early onset, when they did first meet, God says that if they started to fight right away and if they made an appointment there, they would have actually not been able to stand up and defeat them. God wanted to produce certain circumstances and allow both sides to simmer on it a little bit, and so that God would produce the result that He wanted. And this is where we see how God is truly encompassing of all matters. The direct intervention was not so much of a miracle per se, where it's going out of the scope of what is normal, but rather He's building up the human beings, the believers, in a way so that the victory is very clear, that God has been motivating them and giving them a wind for them to truly crush their enemies in a way that is very amazing for history to remember. And this is what history wrote about such certain events when the Arabs of the time and the Muslims of the time were fighting the disbelievers, that it was a crushing victory despite their few numbers. They were so dedicated and they were so pushing forth in what God has told them to do, and they were so motivated, and God clearly shows that this is very essential for people to fight in a war or to win a war. While the other side, as we know, they're quickly to run away and to be scared and to become cowards, and their big numbers don't avail them because they just don't have the certainty that a believer has. Yes, that was presented in other ideas and other times that they fought, but this is just the general understanding that God is building the person up for these wars as long as they're showing certainty, as long as they're holding their grounds. God is telling us that even that the leader is as well. Here we're getting the idea that the leader, he's also affecting the motivation of the people around him. So we could see that the prophet is the one, or the messenger saw a dream where God showed the other side not to be big in numbers, but rather God showed them minuscule to the messenger. And God says that this is so that the people would, so that all of you would not fail. Because people are also siphoning off the energy and the mode of the leader. When they see that the leader is dedicated and he wants to put his effort and he knows that God is on his side, then that also motivates you as a believer to do your part. But if you see the leader, he's worried and he's kind of looking down and he's having these troubles and doubts in his mind, then also the other people will also be pulled down in this bad morale that the leader is showing. And God is making that very clear in the verse here, that if he showed them a lot in the dream, you would have failed and argued in the matter. So God is presenting circumstances, and so that you could keep the motivation, you could keep the morale, and you could keep feeling the strength in your certainty in God. And this is why God has made peace. One can say, well, here God is clearly lying to the blessed prophet. But this is where we start to give these excuses that we know God is not the liar and God is saying the truth. So if God has been showing them in the same manner that they were going to see them on the field, it would have been a lot to see in the dream. But God can produce a ratio where it would have been the messenger and maybe 2 other people against like 8 people. And in a dream that might not seem like a lot because it feels like it's 3 verse 8, or let's say 2 verse 7. So God can produce a ratio where it is the truth that is going to happen on the next day, but it's not in so where it is being presented exactly how it's going to be shown. And remember, this is a dream. So a dream can be something that is symbolic for somebody to learn something off it. And this is what we clearly see, that the prophet was being set up in a positive way to keep up the morale. And this morale also affected the people around them. And God says to us that he has overcome them. Why? These people overcome them. And so that God can produce a matter that he has already ordained, a matter that will be accomplished no matter what, where God is going to humiliate the disbelievers. And so that anyone here that is going to side with the disbelievers, yet they didn't go to war, now they really have to reconsider. Are these believers are they actually supported by God? And how come our gods, our multiple gods, could not defeat what these people have brought forth? Because back then, every side knows that the victory is coming from whoever they're praying to, because the one they're praying to is the one who's going to ordain all matters. But there's only one entity that is capable of doing that, and it's God, the Lord of the skies and this land. And we see now that the victory was given to the underdog, and this is where it's very clear. And God is saying that because of the dream and because of the positive morale that God has set up within the believers, when they did meet, the believers seen them as a little group. Even though they were much bigger in numbers, they just seemed much smaller to the believers. And this was something so that God can really help the believers. And the disbelievers also saw the believers, oh, look at them, they're just few in numbers. But when the disbelievers fell and got humiliated and lost, at this point, they really would feel the embarrassment and they would really feel the humiliation that God has ordained in that matter. God is telling us and reminding us that if we truly do find like a military unit moving towards us, stay stationary, stay ready for what needs to be done, because God is on your side and he has produced this in history many, many times, not only with the people of the book and the children of Israel who were believers and how they overcome their enemies militarily, but even with the people who followed the blessed prophet. We can find ourselves in maybe in the near future or any time, whether it's our group or the group that comes after us, where there might be a war of attrition, where we do have to physically defend the religion because we're going to be abused for what we believe in. This is a promise that God has given us. Not every generation of believers are going to maybe endure a physical war, but it's something that we should be always prepared for. The thing that I believe was what occurred in history, in the recent history, is that the believers stopped fighting because they were just subdued to a point where they're not allowed to fight. So we see much of the wars that are going on in this day and age, it has nothing truly to do with God, but rather it's about political stances and agendas and things that have nothing to do with what God has ordered us to do. But I truly believe if there's a faction that stands up for exactly what God has said, and it was encompassing for people who are believers, and they're standing up against oppression, and they're saying that God has allowed us to live the way that He's ordering us to live, I truly believe that God will shower us with our victory, with His victory, and we will be the ones who are going to conquer. This is a promise that is presented to you in the Quran in many places. But the thing that we have to remember is that if we ever find ourselves in that position, that we truly have to stand our ground. Because even if we seem like a little group, and this is something that is always argued against the believers, like we are such a big group and you're such a little group, we just have to remind them how many little group has defeated a much bigger group by the permission of God. And everything is in the hands of God, and God gives the conquest and the victory to whom He wills. And this is why we have to remember who is more worthy of the victory, the believer or the disbeliever. So let's stay united and let's keep pushing in the efforts that God wants us to push. And if we ever get the opportunity to even strive within ourselves, with ourselves, for God, for the religion of God, and for us to establish the truth on earth, it would be a great honor. And that's why we should always stay steady in front of our enemies and not turn away and run, because the only thing you're going to be running to is a fleeting world, a world that is going to be taken away from you, instead of running towards your God on the path that God has given you. And if you become the victor, you have won. And even if you die in that striving, you also have won. So the victory is for you to keep moving forward and not to turn away and run away, whether it's an intellectual battle or whether it's a physical battle. I hope you guys are enjoying these. All praise to our Lord, the Lord of the worlds, and peace be upon you.